Today I am joined by Dr. Stephanie Martin of Kimberly-Clark Professional. Today we're going to be talking about how we're heading towards a post-COVID world. So what's coming next? Stephanie, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Thank you. So, my name is Stephanie Martin. I have worked at Kimberly Clark for 17 years, mostly in research and development types of roles. I've also done some work in marketing and in customer research, but I've recently come back into research and engineering. And weirdly, hygiene is kind of a passion of mine. So, I'm very happy to be here with you today, Kurt, representing Kimberly Clark Professional.
Excellent. So, well, first of all, yes, thank you very much for talking with us today. Hopefully, as we move further and further into a post-pandemic world, CDC recently said that masks indoors that might be heading away. It makes me think that people are going to be returning to work and school in a way that's more close to what it was before. So this is leaving a lot of folks wondering, what now? Uh, my guess is that you'd suggest we keep our guard up regarding COVID 19.
Well, I think what's really interesting about this pandemic is that it's been so widespread and so prolonged that the consensus of things I've read is actually that COVID-19 as a disease, I guess, is not necessarily going to just magically vanish from the earth as much as we want it to, which is, obviously why, this huge effort for vaccination and, research into therapeutics and whatnot. So likely some version of COVID-19 is going to be what's called endemic into our population, which means that it will just become sort of part of our life, unfortunately, and we'll just kind of have to deal with it, right? So, however, what's really interesting to me about the whole pandemic and to your question about what now is that people, you think about behavior change, right? And it's hard to make things stick, but we've been sort of at this mask wearing, wiping everything down for almost over a year now. And so it'll be interesting to see what behaviors kind of remain and which ones people are, like, I want to drop it like a bad habit, right? So, um,
Right.
people, though, right now, they definitely care more about cleanliness and hygiene probably than I've ever seen before. There's almost this expectation when I walk into any business or office, it's like, well, I want to see you visibly cleaning everything. And that's a really hard expectation to meet, right? I think as as a business person or facilities manager or any of those things, it's like how do I meet this expectation of this standard? And then I also have the CDC saying that we don't necessarily need to do all of these things all the time, right? So I think it's going to be interesting to find the balance of those things and what starts to feel right, like the right approach of frequency and intensity of cleaning and disinfecting. I also think it's really interesting that with all of this extra vigilance with hygiene and masks and everything, I think we've had probably like the mildest flu season on record. With COVID-19, it's like it's hard to remember that we used to care about other things. We used to care about the flu, and we used to care
Yeah.
about bacteria. Oh my gosh, bacteria actually still exist. Like we cared about walking into a business and being food poisoned. So there are
Hmm.
certainly other
We sure did.
reasons to care about surface hygiene and to care about hand hygiene and to care about all of these things with cleanliness. So I know the fact that we've also seen other tangible benefits maybe elsewhere in health probably gives a check in the column of like, gosh, did this really matter? I think it probably did. So like I said, it's going to be interesting to find the balance between what was all in service of COVID-19 and maybe what's just should probably remain as a best practice. It's probably less than what it looks like now, but more than what was before.
That sounds like kind of where my mind was going. So I'm thrilled to hear that a researcher is saying
Right.
that back to me. So with that in mind, I keep coming back to things that were the high touch areas that people were concerned about before. Are they high risk areas, and which ones are they that maybe we don't think about all the
Yeah.
time? Do you have any examples?
Oh gosh, yeah. So I mean, there may be some that are kind of top of mind, obvious, like, this door handle that obviously everyone touches, or um, like when you're at the grocery store and you're signing, the stylus, for like an
Yes.
electronic transaction. I think seeing the way that businesses have, like, I know there's a couple of stores that I've shopped at where they won't even let you approach the counter without they disinfect all of that now before the next person can come up. And did we ever even really think about that before, of like the fact that a million people were pressing their pin or whatever? Another really good example is just touchscreens in general. Like, we think about how our world has evolved just from electronics and how many things are just touchscreen. And I think I had seen a study, again, prior to the pandemic, when we cared about other things. I had seen a study about how many touchscreens at like one fast food chain that uses touchscreens for ordering were contaminated with fecal bacteria, which, again, it's like the next thing you do after pressing that is you go pick up your food and you eat. So, there's sort of those hidden dangers. But I think a one super obvious one is our own cell phones, which are disgusting. And
No.
honestly, they're horrible. And I think it's like the data I've seen on cell phones as like the most mind-blowing amount of germs and bacteria, that you could have. But what's interesting is people seem to be much more comfortable with their own germs than someone else's. Like, that's just a psychology of, like, you just tend to downplay the risk of like your own stuff versus being out in the world, right? So just a reminder to
Right.
please sanitize your cell phone every once in a while, because it's probably disgusting. And same thing, keyboards, desks. Like, there were studies in the past that looked at offices, and people's keyboards and mouse, hardly ever get clean, and they just a lot of people eat at their desk and something like that. So they just harbor a lot of germs and are not very often clean, but extremely high touch. You're probably not touching anything all day as much as you are just on your computer, your keyboard and your mouse.
Right. And I think about, like, if you are going to work, there's probably a bathroom. Maybe there's a couple that you can go to, but you're talking about the fixtures that are in the bathroom. You're talking about toilet handles. Maybe you
Oh
have
gosh,
multiple floors
yes.
in your building. You're hitting elevator buttons.
Yep.
What can we do to keep those surfaces disinfected?
Well, the thing about high touch is, one, just to even have a plan. Like, you want to recognize, like, okay, if I really thought about how I'm cleaning and the frequency that I clean and the things I'm paying attention to, maybe that dusty corner doesn't need as much attention as the bathroom handle or the toilet
Right.
flush. Like, you just, I think we can all use our brains and say, even just watching people, what do people touch? The other thing is, like, have you ever noticed in washrooms where uh, people want, I've heard this before, where people, if they don't think the trash can is in the right place, I've heard this, well, just throw your trash where you want the trash can to be. And eventually the facilities will sort of get the idea, right? People don't want to use their clean hands to open a door handle. So a lot of times now people will have the waste bin by the door handle, so that you can use that paper towel to open it, right? So things like that, where we think very carefully about behavior and what people want to do. We pay extra attention to sanitizing, disinfecting, those high touch things. And then we also provide opportunities. When you think about surfaces are being contaminated by these things, right? So, are we doing even enough to provide people with proper tools for hand hygiene? Do we have products that people like to use? For example, in hospitals, when they use really chemically, like a lot of the antimicrobial soaps have a lot of drying agents and things in them, and it creates this sort of cycle of unpleasantness where it's unpleasant to wash my hands 30 times a day when the soap is really drying, and the paper towels are scratchy, and it's about doing things that maybe make it easier for people versus harder. What makes people want to participate in hand hygiene? Because we have hands touching surfaces and then the surfaces are getting contaminated. So it's about thinking about it from both sides of the equation.
And to me, I feel like there's this. We're talking about hospitals. We're talking about schools. We're talking about manufacturing plants. I mean, it's a place where people congregate. So, like, from the break rooms at work to the locker rooms at schools, what can people do to keep these areas hygienic and clean?
Absolutely, that's such a good point. And break rooms, for example, that's another area where they get really, really contaminated because people are doing their lunches and they're, rinsing things. Sometimes there might be a sink or whatever. So again, it's are you actually providing materials to help emphasize and provide ways for people to do hygienic things? So do you have a means for people to either sanitize their hands or wash their hands in the break room? Do you have an opportunity for people? For example, we're going to place a canister of disinfectant wipes and encourage people to wipe down after themselves, right? Um, and you think about a lot of times people combine using the washroom with using the break room because it's like my lunch break, so I'm kind of going to do everything. So without getting too gross, like you think about the dangers of sort of like improper hand hygiene then leading into the break room or vice versa, and it's potential for a lot of contamination. So another thing that you could do is disinfecting products, sanitizing products. They tend to work like just for the moment, right? So I wipe this surface down, I disinfect it, and pretty much someone could come along and touch that surface and it's somewhat immediately contaminated, which is sort of sad. I mean, I think as a
Yeah,
mom, it's like that
yeah,
feeling of I've just mopped the floor and my kids just came in with muddy shoes and you're like, dang it, I got to do it again. So it's like what's the solution there? And I just do want to take a second to talk about this new product that KCP has called Scott 24-hour sanitizing wipes, only because it's a really unique product. It's the first pre-saturated wipe that does have a 24-hour sanitization claim, which means it continues to kill 99.9% of bacteria for 24 hours in spite of the multiple touches. So it actually was designed with that in mind of like, why do we have to keep doing this all the time? Couldn't there be a way to leave something behind that's continuing to do something active on the surface? And that's really the problem that Scott 24 is trying to solve. So we call it's giving you confidence between cleans, because we shouldn't stop doing our cleaning and sanitizing and disinfecting that we do on a daily and routine basis, but just to give you that confidence that something's actually happening between those times is what that product's trying to do. So I just think it's a great product, and like truly as a mom, like as a KCP person, yeah, I just think it's awesome. So that's another potential solution in the arsenal of between hand hygiene and surface cleanliness. You could add in a product like that does have some residual activity to help again further protect those surfaces in those high touch areas against like further contamination when you can't be cleaning all the time.
it really just sounds like to me the perfect thing for my wife and I to use with our toddler.
Yeah,
Every
right.
surface is something that she wants to
Pretty much.
touch, something that she wants to eat off of.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Uh, let's change gears a little bit here and let's talk about those who may have already returned to work um, a while ago or a long
Sure.
time ago, even. They maybe never stopped going to work. Uh, how do you maintain? To me, it always feels like, how do you maintain the cleanliness? This kind of feels like a diet. You do all the work at first because you're dedicated, you're excited, it's necessary, you feel like, hey, this is a good idea. But then time passes and you start to slip. At least I do with my diet. So, how can we
Yeah.
maintain? How do we keep staying clean?
I love the analogy that you just made, that it's like a diet where you it's difficult, right? It's difficult to maintain the energy. And I think your earlier comment about, returning to like what's normal now, what do we do now? And I kept hearing this term like pandemic fatigue. Like there is a point where people honestly have just lost the will in some cases to comply because it's just so defeating, to think about I have to maintain this level forever. And it's just, it's demoralizing. Um,
Hmm.
but I think like a diet, right? How do people who are successful at dieting, what are the things that they do, right? They make doing healthy things easier and more accessible than doing not healthy things, right? So diet number one tip is that I'm going to make sure that my refrigerator is stocked with healthy food. And maybe I'm going to intentionally not purchase, you know, I'm a Cheetos person. I can't lie. Maybe I just won't buy those anymore. So I am actually partially made of Cheeto dust. That's a fact if you cut me open. But yeah, I mean, like, you have to think about how you would actually strategize making the healthier thing easier, right? So I think in the same way, we have to think about what we're doing in our offices or in our, workplaces or, wherever we might be. What are we doing to make these things easier so that it doesn't necessarily feel like I'm having to put in all this effort, but these things are sort of naturally in my area, right? One thing, Kurt, is like at Kimberly-Clark before the pandemic, because we've had some office closure as well, we used to have hand sanitizer spaced out like it felt like every 10 feet or so. And so, you'd pass one and you do it. And then you pass another one and they're like, well, like I just did it, but that person's walking by and they don't know I just did it. So I'm going to do it again. So there is a little bit of I don't want to call it like it's hand sanitizer shaming necessarily, but there is something to be said for having the product's just accessible and frequent, and you go in a hospital, for example, there's a hand sanitizer dispenser like every 3 rooms, there's no excuse for a person to not have the opportunity to do it because everything is always accessible and right there. And going back to the break room example, there's no excuse for someone to not clean up for themselves if you provided everything that they would need to do that there. It's when someone wants to clean up and it's like, oh, we're out of soap, or oh, we're out of wipes, or we don't have anything and I have to go somewhere and get it. It's like, nah, my meeting is in 2 minutes, so sorry. So
Right.
I think we can imagine how we are training people to do the right thing, but are we even enabling people to do the right thing? And same thing with hand hygiene. How many times have we gone into a washroom and they're out of soap, or they're out of paper towels, or maybe there's an air dryer and there's a line to dry your hands? It's what are we doing to help people participate in the process just on the product side? So I think that's really where a lot of the kind of the magic lies, is having prompts for people to do things, but also making sure that the products are easily accessible and always available to do it. Because I do think people want to do the right thing. It's just sometimes it's too much effort to do it.
Completely agree. I feel like this is one of those times where, uh, to go back to the wipes that work for 24 hours,
Yeah,
if you tell me that I have to wipe down my phone once and then it's going to, at least on some level, continue to stay clean for a full day, well, I touch that thing all the time. I hand it off to other people. My toddler, again, is touching it.
right.
That makes me feel a lot better. That makes me think that,
Absolutely.
oh, maybe I can stay on top of this.
Right,
What,
right.
and that actually probably is my next question for you, I guess. How do we stay on top of this? We've kind of discussed that a bit, but why do we care about staying on top of this?
I think that one thing that has become very apparent to me as part of the pandemic is, to whatever degree we thought we were interconnected before, both like locally, nationally, globally, I think that sense has been completely heightened, right? Where what we do in my little, in my home, and then I go somewhere else, that actually has a very real ability to affect somebody else. And it was this, like, if you remember last year, was kind of like the idea of taking this pause, right? We had sort of this lockdown, which I think is like a horrible term. Actually, I think they should have come up with something better, like a rest. We're taking a rest. But
Yeah,
the lockdown was really pitched as doing it for your neighbor, was doing it for other people. Like, together we can actually work to solve this problem. But if everyone just sort of continues to be in their little bubble and only kind of do for themselves, then it's going to prolong the agony, right? So I think that that's why we should care about staying on top of this, is because our ability to impact someone else, whether it's in our own home or community, broader, nationally, globally, when we travel, for example, the things that we do actually matter. And I think we've seen that now play out on this like super global global scale. And even like with the situation in India, for example, I mean, it's like, gosh, you just see how different it is when just the access to just basic things with hygiene, what a difference that can make in terms of the outcome of this pandemic. So again, I mean, I just think that staying vigilant, at least with respect to hygiene, is just a really simple and easy way to care about people and to show our friends and our neighbors that we care.
I totally get it. I have felt ever since the great toilet paper crunch in
Right.
2020
Yeah.
that we are more connected than we ever realized.
Mhm.
Supply chains that are built to be they're not built to be fragile, but if they are more fragile, if you
Yeah.
aren't strengthening your supply chain, you're leaving yourself vulnerable. And you might not realize it until you're out of toilet paper.
Yeah.
That's not something anybody wants. So we're all clearly way more connected than I think we thought we were. Well, Stephanie, thank you very much. I have taken enough of your time. But because we do think of KCP as a partner, do you have any parting tips for us?
Yeah, and thank you. We love Fastenal, and I'm glad that we are considered a partner. And one of the things that I think makes us an excellent partner is that we're not just about surface hygiene, and we know an awful lot about just hand hygiene and hygiene in general. So the way we think about your office or your workplace or wherever it might be is actually very holistic. We're not saying that, oh, just wipe down the surface and everything's going to be okay, or just wash your hands and everything is going to be okay. We're really trying to think about a total solution for your space that will just elevate the overall hygiene and help, obviously everyone wants to be more hygienic these days. So hopefully we have just the right solution to do that. And we're always available too to answer questions, or, like I talk to customers a lot too. So if you ever have a question, obviously I like to talk about hygiene, which is weird, but if you have any questions, it's my genuine pleasure to like get super deep and nerdy about this stuff if you want to. So yeah, please just consider Kimberly-Clark Professional your friend and your partner.
Well, thank you again. Really appreciate it.